began on a rainy evening in a small Midwestern town. A traveling salesman, Michael Turner, was exhausted after driving for nearly 12 hours. He pulled into a modest roadside hotel, its neon sign flickering faintly in the storm. At the front desk, the clerk barely looked up, handing him a room key without asking for ID. Michael thought it was unusual, but fatigue drowned out his suspicion. Have you ever checked into a place that instantly felt off? When Michael reached the third floor, he noticed the hallway was strangely quiet. The carpeting was worn, and most doors were unnumbered. His key was for room 313, but when he finally found it, the brass numbers looked scratched and crooked, as if they had been pried off before. Inside, the room smelled faintly of mildew and something metallic. The furniture was outdated, but what unsettled him most was the silence. No hum of air conditioning, no sound from neighboring rooms, just emptiness. Have you ever walked into a place and immediately felt like you weren't supposed to be there? As Michael settled into bed, he noticed the wallpaper peeling in strips, almost as though someone had clawed at it. Around midnight, he woke to the sound of water dripping, but the bathroom faucet was dry. Then, from the corner of the room, came the sound of faint breathing. Heavy, labored. He whispered into the dark, "Hello!" But no answer came, only the steady sound of someone sharing the room with him. What would you do if you heard breathing in the dark, knowing you were alone? Terrified, Michael grabbed the old rotary phone by the bed and dialed the front desk. When the clerk answered, Michael stammered about hearing someone in his room. There was a pause before the clerk replied coldly, "Sir, that room hasn't been occupied in years. It's supposed to be locked." Michael froze, staring at the door he had entered only hours before. The line suddenly went dead. At dawn, Michael rushed to pack his things. But when he opened the door, the hallway looked different. The carpeting was clean, the walls freshly painted. Yet when he tried to retrace his steps, room 313 was gone. The numbers on the doors jumped from 311 to 315. Confused, he stumbled downstairs, demanding an explanation. The clerk looked puzzled, insisting there was no such room at the hotel. Michael insisted otherwise, but the clerk only shook his head. So what happened to the room Michael swore he slept in? Later that week, Michael called the hotel's management, still shaken. They checked the logs. There was no record of his stay, no receipt, no booking, nothing. According to their files, Michael Turner had never been there. Yet in his bag, he found the key to room 313, cold and rusted, with dried flecks of something dark along its edge. What do you think Michael experienced that night? Have you ever stayed in a hotel that felt wrong? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like this video if you want more true horror stories. In the heart of Chicago, a young couple, Daniel and Claire, checked into a towering business hotel for a weekend getaway. The lobby was sleek, modern, filled with the soft hum of travelers and rolling luggage. But from the start, something about the place unnerved Claire. The staff avoided eye contact, and conversations hushed whenever guests passed. Their room was on the 10th floor. As the elevator ascended, Claire noticed a strange detail. The panel skipped a button. Floors 9 and 11 were there, but 10 had no marking. Oddly, when their keycard was swiped, the elevator still stopped at that missing level. The doors opened to a dim, silent corridor. The hallway was long and narrow, with flickering lights and cracked tiles. A sign above read, 10th floor, restricted access. Yet their keycard had granted them entry. Daniel laughed it off as a hotel oversight. Claire wasn't so sure. Would you still stay in a hotel if you discovered your room was on a floor that supposedly didn't exist? At check-in, the receptionist had glanced at their reservation and hesitated for a moment before sliding the room key across the counter. 10th floor? She whispered, almost to herself, then quickly forced a smile. Enjoy your stay. That memory now unsettled Claire. In their room, she tried to relax, but the windows were bolted shut and the curtains wouldn't draw properly. A faint stain stretched across the carpet, and the air was stale, almost sour. Later that evening, while Daniel showered, Claire ventured into the hallway. She found a janitor mopping near the stairwell. When she mentioned their room number, his face went pale. "You shouldn't be here," he muttered. Before she could ask more, he hurried down the stairs, abandoning his bucket. Have you ever gotten a warning from a stranger that felt more like a desperate plea than advice? That night, Daniel and Claire were startled by heavy footsteps pacing the corridor outside their room. At first, Daniel assumed it was another guest, but the steps didn't fade or grow closer. They circled endlessly, back and forth, like someone patrolling. Claire pressed her ear to the door. The sound was too heavy to be casual walking. It was slow, deliberate, dragging, as if the person wore boots weighed down by water. At one point, the footsteps stopped directly outside their door. Silence. Then, a single knock. Daniel flung the door open, but the hallway was empty. The lights flickered overhead, casting long shadows. They stepped out, searching both directions, but saw no one. When they returned inside, the carpet near their doorway was damp, though no water source was nearby. What would you do if footsteps outside your door refused to go away? The following evening, the couple returned from dinner to find their floor unnaturally quiet. Not a single other guest appeared on the 10th level. Then, without warning, the power went out. The room was plunged into darkness, save for the dim glow of the emergency exit sign. Claire clutched Daniel's arm as a low humming filled the air. It wasn't the generator. It sounded like chanting, faint and muffled, coming from somewhere down the hallway. Daniel grabbed his phone and flicked on the flashlight. The beam revealed streaks along the walls, long handprints smeared in something dark. They tried the elevator, but it was stuck. The stairwell door was locked from the inside, as if deliberately barred. Claire began to panic, but Daniel whispered they should stay calm. Just then, the chanting stopped abruptly, replaced by a single piercing scream echoing from one of the rooms. Driven by fear but also curiosity, Daniel followed the sound to a door at the very end of the hallway. This number plate was missing. When he pressed his ear to it, faint sobbing could be heard. A woman's voice, pleading. Claire begged him not to open it, but Daniel insisted they couldn't just ignore it. He turned the handle, but it didn't budge. Then, without warning, the sobbing ceased, replaced by silence so absolute it rang in their ears. Suddenly, every door along the hallway creaked open a few inches, one after the other, like a synchronized gesture. Cold air poured out, carrying a stench of rot. Claire screamed, yanking Daniel back toward their room. As they ran, the doors began to slam shut behind them, one by one, chasing them down the corridor with deafening force. If you were standing in that hallway, would you have opened the door or run? By morning, the couple decided to leave the hotel immediately. They packed quickly and rushed to the lobby. Yet when Daniel approached the receptionist, she looked confused. "Sir, you're not checked in," she said. "We have no guests registered under that name." Daniel showed her their keycard, but the plastic was blank, smooth, without any print. When he insisted, security was called. They claimed the 10th floor had been sealed off years ago after a fire killed multiple guests who had been trapped inside. Since then, it had been permanently closed. Daniel and Claire stared at each other, their faces pale. When they demanded to be taken upstairs, the guard shook his head. "There is no 10th floor." Later that week, while unpacking at home, Claire discovered something lodged in her suitcase lining. A rusted hotel key tagged with the number 1001. It smelled faintly of smoke. Would you have stayed one more night? Or left immediately? Share your thoughts in the comments, and if you've ever had a strange hotel experience, we'd love to hear your story. Don't forget to subscribe for more chilling true horror cases. It was 2009 when Richard Evans, a consultant from Denver, flew into Phoenix for a 3-day conference. He booked a mid-range hotel close to the airport, functional, unremarkable, the kind of place businessmen stayed in for convenience. Everything appeared perfectly normal. Clean lobby, courteous staff, standard amenities. On his second night, after long hours of networking, Richard returned to his room exhausted. He was assigned room 407, a modest corner suite with a single bed and a small writing desk. Nothing seemed unusual at first. He tossed his briefcase down and loosened his tie, eager for rest. But as he settled in, he noticed something odd. The desk drawer wouldn't shut properly. When he tugged it open, he found a faded leather-bound journal. Its pages were brittle, filled with scribbled handwriting that belonged to someone long gone. On the inside cover, one line was carved deep into the leather: "Don't stay here after midnight." What would you do if you found a desperate warning left behind by a stranger? Richard tried to shake it off as some prank from a past guest. He tossed the journal aside and got ready for bed. Around 1 a.m., however, he woke abruptly to a faint scratching noise. At first, he thought it was coming from the hallway, but when he switched on the bedside lamp, he realized the sound was inside the room. His eyes darted toward the desk. The journal lay open on its own, its pages fluttering as though stirred by wind, though the windows were firmly shut. He got up slowly, heart pounding, and saw faint words scrawled across the wallpaper just above the desk. In shaky letters it read, "Still here." Terrified, Richard grabbed his phone and tried to call the front desk, but the line only produced static. The scratching grew louder, this time spreading across the room. He pulled back the curtains, no one outside, just the still night. Yet when he turned back, the writing had doubled in size. "Still here. Still here." Have you ever felt like a place was trying to communicate with you when you knew it shouldn't be possible? By the next morning, Richard tried to convince himself it had been exhaustion or stress. He checked out the wallpaper again in daylight, clean, pristine, no writing visible. He laughed nervously at his own imagination. but something in him refused to feel at ease. That night, after the conference dinner, he returned to his room determined to ignore everything. Yet as he brushed his teeth, he noticed the bathroom mirror fogging unnaturally, though he hadn't turned on hot water. Slowly, words appeared across the glass, written as if by an invisible hand. "Why did you stay?" Richard froze, gripping the counter. His reflection seemed wrong, slightly delayed, as though the glass were showing him a few seconds too late. He backed out of the bathroom and shut the door, vowing not to go back in. But a faint knock came from inside the bathroom, followed by 3 slow taps on the mirror itself. What would you have done? Run immediately or stay to see what happened next? Desperate for an explanation, Richard knocked on the door of room 409 the next morning, hoping to speak with a neighboring guest. An older woman answered. She looked tired, her face pale, and when Richard mentioned his room number, her expression hardened. "You're in 407? She asked, her voice sharp. Richard nodded. The woman lowered her gaze, whispering, "That room should be locked. The last man who stayed there never checked out." Richard pressed for details, but she quickly shut the door, leaving him standing alone in the hallway. Later that day, he asked the front desk about the previous occupant. The clerk's smile faltered. After a long pause, he admitted that room 407 had once been the site of a guest's sudden death years earlier, a traveling salesman who was found slumped over the writing desk. They assured Richard it was all cleaned up, but their unease told another story. If someone told you your hotel room had a history like that, would you pack up and leave immediately? Richard decided he wouldn't let superstition ruin his business trip. But on the final night, everything escalated. As he lay in bed, the lights flickered violently before going out entirely. He fumbled for his phone flashlight, but it refused to turn on. A heavy pressure filled the air, making it difficult to breathe. From the corner near the desk, a shadow formed, vague at first, then solidifying into a figure seated in the chair. Richard's chest tightened as he realized it was a man in an old-fashioned suit. His head slumped unnaturally forward. The figure slowly raised its face, revealing hollow sockets where eyes should have been. It pointed toward Richard's suitcase, then toward the door, as if urging him to leave. Paralyzed with terror, Richard couldn't move. The figure stood and began walking toward the bed, each step leaving faint burn marks on the carpet. By dawn, Richard was found in the lobby, pale, shaken, and barely coherent. Staff insisted he had checked out the night before and hadn't been seen since. His signature was on the records, yet Richard swore he'd never left his room until that morning. When he retrieved his belongings, his suitcase smelled faintly of smoke, and inside was the old leather journal he had discovered on the first night, though he remembered leaving it on the desk. On the last page, a fresh line had been scrawled in shaky handwriting. "Now you know." Years later, Richard refused to speak publicly about the incident. He never returned to that hotel again, and the room number was eventually removed from the floor plan altogether. But some say late at night, if you walk past the 4th floor hallway, you can still hear scratching behind the wall where room 407 once stood. Do you think Richard truly experienced the guest who never checked out? Or was it the stress of travel and exhaustion? Comment below with your thoughts, and if you've ever had a similar experience, share your story. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more chilling accounts. In the spring of 2014, newlyweds Emily and Jason booked a small countryside hotel in Vermont for their honeymoon. The inn was historic, dating back to the 1800s, and had been restored to charm tourists seeking a rustic getaway. Locals spoke warmly of its antique furniture, candlelit dining, and quiet seclusion. Upon arrival, the couple was offered a complimentary upgrade. "You're in luck," the receptionist smiled. "The honeymoon suite is available." The way she said it was strange, almost rehearsed, but Emily was too excited to notice. Jason signed the guest log, and they carried their luggage up the creaky staircase. The honeymoon suite was larger than expected. Ornate bed, velvet drapes, a clawfoot tub in the adjoining bathroom. Yet beneath the polish was something unsettling. The air felt heavier there than in the rest of the inn, and faint water stains marred the ceiling above the bed. Emily brushed it off. After all, it was their honeymoon. Would you accept a free room upgrade if it came with a strange feeling you couldn't explain? The first evening was quiet. The couple dined in the hotel restaurant and returned to their room around 10. Jason fell asleep quickly, but Emily remained awake, scrolling through her phone. Around midnight, she heard the bathtub faucet drip, slow, steady, echoing through the suite. When she checked, the tap was dry. Yet in the tub's porcelain basin, she noticed small puddles forming, though no water was running. The surface rippled as if disturbed by unseen movement. She backed away, unsettled, and shut the bathroom door firmly. Later that night, she awoke again, this time to the sensation of someone lying on the bed beside her. Jason was sound asleep on her right, but she felt the mattress dip heavily on her left. Heart racing, she turned. Nothing there. Just a cold indentation pressed deep into the sheets. The next morning, Emily tried to convince herself she had been imagining things. But as she dressed, her eyes kept drifting to the large oil painting hung directly across from the bed. It depicted a bride and groom standing before the very same inn, painted in sepia tones. At first glance, the painting seemed ordinary, but the longer Emily stared, the more wrong it appeared. The bride's face was smudged, her eyes painted over in dark strokes, leaving hollow voids, and the groom's expression was twisted into something that resembled a sneer more than a smile. Jason shrugged it off, telling her it was just old art. But when they returned later that day, Emily swore the painting had changed. The groom's head was now tilted slightly downward, as if watching them sleep. Jason laughed nervously, but refused to look again. Have you ever felt a painting's eyes following you around the room? That evening, the hotel manager stopped by unexpectedly, asking if the couple was comfortable in their room. He lingered oddly, scanning the suite as though checking for something. When Emily mentioned the painting, his smile stiffened. "It's always been there," he said quietly before leaving. Curiosity gnawed at Emily. She visited the hotel library downstairs, flipping through an old guest ledger from the 1920s. Her stomach dropped when she found a record of a couple with their same last name, Evans, who had checked into the honeymoon suite almost a century earlier. In the margin, written faintly in pencil, were two words, "Never left." When she returned upstairs, the suite felt colder than before. The bed covers had been pulled back neatly, though neither she nor Jason had done it. And the indent in the mattress, the same one she had felt the night before, was there again, deeper this time, as if someone unseen had been waiting for her. By the third night, Jason began to sense it too. As they lay in bed, he whispered that he could hear breathing, faint but distinct, coming from the empty space between them. Emily grabbed his hand tightly, tears filling her eyes. They both stayed awake, straining to listen. Suddenly, the sound shifted. It was no longer between them, but directly behind Emily's ear. A slow inhale, followed by a rattling exhale, as though someone was inches from her. She screamed, leaping from the bed. Jason flicked on the bedside lamp, but the room was empty. The painting on the wall now showed something different. The bride's face, once blurred, was clearer, her features eerily similar to Emily's. The resemblance was undeniable. Emily staggered back, realizing the painting was no longer depicting strangers. It was showing them. What would you do if a painting in your hotel room began changing to reflect your own life? Determined to leave, the couple packed their bags in the middle of the night and rushed to the front desk. The receptionist looked startled when she saw their room key. "But sir," she said softly, "we don't assign the honeymoon suite anymore. It's been closed since the 1940s. Jason slammed the key down, demanding answers. The clerk shook her head. "That room doesn't exist." She gestured to a map of the inn on the wall behind her. Where the honeymoon suite should have been, there was nothing but empty space. Emily turned pale, realizing that their luggage was still upstairs. Against her instincts, they returned together. But when they reached the hallway, the door to their room was gone. In its place was a solid brick wall, freshly painted, as if no door had ever existed. The faint sound of dripping water echoed behind it. Would you risk going back for your belongings if the room itself had vanished?